Rose, let me introduce you first. You are the director for the UN Climate Technology Center, 20 years experience providing policy advice on a wide range of climate change, environment, and sustainable development issues. You've served previously as Chief National Resources Officer at the African Development Bank and held various leadership positions within the UN Development Program. You have a PhD in Environment and Natural Resource Governance, a master's degree in International Comparative Law, and a Bachelor of Law degree. Another wonderful CV, Rose, that puts mine to shame, obviously, but that's why we want to speak to you and learn from you. Rose, let me ask you this to begin with. There's something like 300 technology transfers that you've experienced and facilitated in over 100 developing countries. It's probably an expansive question, but if you can, what have been some of your experiences from those?
Thank you, Richard. I must start by commending both David and Valerie. I think they've laid a very wonderful platform for us to have this conversation. And I do agree with the audience. I was watching the chat that we were happy to have Valerie go on. So thank you very much. But to your question, really, I think it is what Valerie said, that AI transformation is not just about technology. It's about human transformation. And as you mentioned, for the work that I do, the context within which I see AI, therefore, is to help us achieve the universal beneficial goals or our shared values as a global community. Working for the United Nations, as I have for a very long time, and having worked in the development world, so the context within which I see these shared values is what we agreed upon is in the SDGs. So it is anything from climate change, but it's also about poverty, things we talked about, gender equality, enabling access to energy for all. And I'm not trying to be a dampener of the beautiful party we are having so far. Please put any untoward comments down to the vagaries of my job, because traveling extensively around the world and living and witnessing firsthand human suffering, poverty, and deprivation on the one hand, and then on the other hand, seeing the possibilities that technology brings, and especially AI. In fact, I am extremely hopeful. I tell Richard all the time, I'm an eternal optimist, because I always see the possibilities of what we can do if only, and that's the word, if only we can harness a lot of these technologies. And I see AI as one of those that can help us do that. So to the question you raise again, so the issues of fairness, equity, and inclusion, or what the role of, for example, technologies like blockchain can be, or how we can scale up AI. Because I can tell you that when we talk about it, it sounds almost as if it's available and equally accessible around the globe. But if you look at the countries that I am mandated to serve, these countries are in Africa, they're developing countries in Africa, in the Asia and Pacific region, and in the Latin American and the Caribbean region. I was looking at the numbers in preparation for this meeting. The total population of these countries alone is 2.7 billion people. The majority of these people actually do not have access to what we're talking about. The infrastructure for energy or electricity, the cost of data in some of these countries is so prohibitively high. And then just the level of skilling and innovation. A lot of the countries that I travel in, the developing countries, they just don't have systems of innovation that would enable them to plug into this wonderful and amazing prospect that is being offered by the advancement in AI. But again, as I said, that in spite of this, I must confess that I see real opportunities in some of these countries. And where do I see the opportunities? It's in the work we do. I'll give you an example. The last conversation, Valerie, we are having on robotics and automated autonomous vehicles. So one of the requests, for example, we had from one of the countries, a developing country, I don't think I'll mention it for proprietary reasons, is that they wanted support to use autonomous vehicles and drone technology for precision agriculture. But when in fact we went into the country and reviewed their laws, they were all classified under military hardware. And so they could actually not import any of these technologies. And these were, laws that were made several years ago when there was an understanding of the benefits of AI and robotics and autonomous vehicles, but they're not sure. So it was classified in a manner that was really prohibitive in terms of access and innovation, the level of licensing that was required. And so before they could even benefit from these technologies that were able to transfer from companies in countries in Europe that were willing to transfer it, we had to review the entire legal system, not just relating to military hardware, but, importation laws, tax incentives. So it's a whole range of things. And what that did, it opened up the possibilities, not just for the precision agriculture they wanted, but for health and for other sectors. And therein lies my eternal optimism when I say that there's a real sense of hope in what we do in this. So maybe I will let you say something, but just to say that, I'd just like to share with you some of the experiences based on the work that I do in these countries.
I'm just spotlighting you, Valerie, again there. I saw that you were nodding. Those sentiments obviously resonate with you.
Yes, absolutely, because I was born in New Caledonia. It's a small tropical island, minuscule tropical island, a French colony nearby Australia. And when you're born on a very small island, and my ancestors are from there, so they're indigenous, you have a view of the world, a perspective of the world that is slightly different, because when everybody is talking about those great innovations out there and you're a child and you're like, oh, wow, that sounds great, but we don't have access to any of that here, right? So it's an interesting gap between what can be done and what people have access to. So yeah, I found very compelling the example you just gave, Rose, of the fact that on one hand, there is an opportunity to use technology to promote food security, but it can't be used because regulations have not evolved in that direction, and maybe they are also shaped by the cultural views of those who crafted those regulations, and that gap is a problem, and it happens very often. We see that in precision medicines too. Some tools are created to foster a better diagnosis in developing countries, but then we realize that actually we didn't factor in that the technologies that exist already in those countries cannot host that great app that was designed to actually help them. So we have to redo that, restart from. So yes. That gap, in perspective is fundamental to address, and we don't talk about it enough.
Yes. Thank you, Valerie. And you may as well stay on the couch. That's what Graham Norton does, isn't it? He keeps people on the stage. But Rose, let's before we dive any deeper into this, I remember a serendipitous moment at the airport where I was reading Richard Wilson and Kate Pickett's brilliant book, The Spirit Level: Why Equality is Better for Everyone, and saw someone else reading it at the same time. That was like 10 years ago. Do you think we still don't understand this one statement, equality is better for everyone?
Yeah, I think it really is. And again, therein is where I see the advantage of technological advancement and access that technology gives, because as Valerie was saying, when you come from a small developing country like I do, it's very easy to sit in your little corner of the world and imagine that, the world is as it is because that's what you see. What technology has allowed us to be aspirational, because sitting in the little village in Uganda, where I come from, we are all able to aspire to what is possible, to the possibilities of what the highest endeavor of human achievement can be, because we have access to this technology. Sitting on a mobile phone, you don't even need an advanced computer or an iPad or any other gizmo that is advanced. And so that is really important for us to recognize that the applicability of AI allows us to enable access in ways that we never envisioned before and reach the most remote part of the world. And the technology, infrastructural technology that supports that also need not to be on grid levels of the scales we used to have in the past. And so I think it is about changing our thinking and outlook to life and what is possible, and understanding that AI can transform the lives of one part of the global community, but it can actually transform all 7 billion people. Imagine a world where all 7 billion people lived exactly the way everybody lives in Denmark, where I live right now. I think it would be a wonderful world. And again, that is within the context of the shared values. And for me, as I said, within the Sustainable Development Goals, where we talk about the environment, life on Earth, poverty, gender equality. Those are what we agreed as the shared values. And so I think that is where, for me, I see the possibilities. And I see it, whether I'm in a small Pacific island, whether I'm in Bolivia in Latin America, whether I'm in a small country in Africa, the human condition when it comes to poverty and pain and suffering is the same. Yeah. The possibilities that technological transformation and AI offers are exactly the same, because it's the great equalizer. I think I've said this to you, Richard, before. It is the great equalizer that enables us to use the same platform, to access the same medicine, same education, the same healthcare. And again, as I say, that is really what I see. Two roles. I also speak within the context of working with governments. Working for the UN, we are international civil servants, so we generally work with governments, increasingly with the private sector. And that is where, even as we talk about the big tech and how they are driving this race, as it were, you also have to factor in the governments. This is possible because of the context within which they are thriving. They are able to innovate, they're able to scale up, they're able to bring in investments. That is not possible elsewhere. So how do you enable that as well? That depends on leadership, it depends on policy, it depends on the regulatory environment, nurturing a system of innovation. So when Valerie was talking about girls every day now, it's become fashionable to talk about girls in science globally, but especially in the global south. We know that it does make a difference. The more equal societies in the world, the science, algorithmic data, and real data to show us are the more equal societies where men and women have some levels of access and then choice on the life they want to lead. So those are, for me, as I said in the beginning, it's not just about technological transformation, it's about transforming the human condition, the cultures and the way we live. And that's the context within which I look at it. So how do we ensure equity, access, inclusion, and then attainment of our common aspirations as humans for a better life?
Yes.
Brilliant. That's all I want to say. I think you're brilliant. It's wonderful to listen to you. Thank you.
Rose, I mean, there's so many factors here, and there's the domino effect, and you talk about leadership and economies and networks and so on, as in the physical people networks. Is there any benefit to be gained from just enhancing the technology? So if you did just put more stable power in, or cheaper data, or more reliable connectivity, do those alone, do they make any significant difference, or do you have to have the ecosystems that go with them?
Ultimately, you need an ecosystem. It's an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary piece of engagement. So there's no question about it. But there are some fundamentals that must be in place. I'll use the example of Africa because that's where I come from. In Africa alone, over 600 million people do not have access to electricity. So that alone is enough to prohibit any sort of uptake for AI. If you were to enable access to electricity, it would mean you would be able to establish the rest of the infrastructure that is required to enable access. to all technologies, including AI. So there are certain fundamentals, but ultimately, I think there's no question about it. It's multidisciplinary, but you would need the right regulatory and investment environment. You would need the right level of innovation that has to be driven by the level of skilling and education that is in those countries in science. So it's a whole ecosystem, but we agree that there are certain fundamentals that must be in place.
Mm-hmm. And does it all start with this access to education, access to opportunity, and access to finance, and particularly for women? Is that one of the key focus areas for the UN?
I think access overall.
Okay.
There are certain enablers or equalizers, as we call them. Education is one of them. It's the only reason I'm here and not, say, my cousin in the little village I came from. The only difference between me and her is the level of education and skilling I've had the opportunity to achieve. So education is one of them, but technology also lies in that category as a real enabler. And we know finance is the same. Countries with higher GDPs are able to invest more innovation in an R&D and therefore drive higher levels of technological advancement. So that is an important element. Countries with low development indices and low GDPs do not have money to invest in innovation or R&D. I've told you I travel extensively now. I manage projects in over 100 countries. You go to these countries, there are no systems of innovation, national innovation, simply precisely for that level. So those are some of the variables that you look at when you're trying to understand what can be done. But then you know that innovation, education does make a difference. Access to energy does make a difference. Electrification, we now know with the renewables that can be achieved off-grid without huge infrastructural investments that went with the prior electrification system. That is useful. So we now know, and with the AI applications, we can be very precise in where we target. So in terms of geographies, but also in terms of gender and all that where you need. And that's the beauty of what AI offers. So we can be very specific and very intentional in what we want to do. And that is also the beauty of what this offers.
There's a question from David Wood. Actually, Valerie, perhaps you would lend your thoughts to it after Rose has spoken on it. He says, do you see countries where they're encouraging sharing across the whole population the benefits of AI, potentially other technologies, but primarily AI? And if you do, are these examples that we can learn from? Is that Denmark, Rose, is it? Or is there other countries as well where you see that?
Sorry, I thought you were asking Valerie.
No, I was going to asking Valerie to comment after you've spoken, to give her time to think as well. But what springs to mind when we talk about equity in AI in a country? Is there somewhere?
Yeah, I mean for the work we do when we talk about equity as opposed to equality, it's very specific. So it's about access and enabling that access. So it's a very specific, what we mean in terms of intention, and so our intentions are directed to that. So yes, and that is what I say. So I'll give an example. If you're in Denmark, how do you achieve equity? Universal healthcare system, universal education. That puts everybody on the same standing. And then the choices that emerge out of that. And I think that is important. And the thing about the human condition and technology, I like one of the comments someone made when both David and Valerie were speaking. He said, brilliant speakers. It demonstrates that humans still have superiority over robots. I thought it was a great compliment. I should say that. But the idea is that we learn. Knowledge is incremental. Now we learn in leaps and bounds. Before it would take us years, sometimes decades. Now with the advancements in AI, our ability to learn is very fast. So the levels of increment are extremely high. That's why we are now using terms like leapfrogging. So those are the things that really make a difference when we talk about equity we're talking about access, intentionally enabling that access, I think, is what is important.
Jaisel's going to nudge me on time in a minute, but Valerie, what country springs to mind, or area springs to mind when we talk about equitable AI?
It's a tough question. If you don't mind, I'd rather react to what Rose said, because she insisted a lot on access. And you know, there are things that people don't realize, like, for instance, in the world, 250 million women have fewer access to the internet than men. That's a huge gap. And so access matters also, even when the technology is already there. It's not necessarily equitably accessible to everyone, no matter what. So yeah, equity and access, I think, are very, very important topics. I just wanted to react to that.
Yeah, Rose, there's a lot of love in the chat, by the way, if you get a chance to look at this, and some questions actually for you that unfortunately we do 2 hours, and obviously it's tight. David, did you want to make a point or ask Rose something?
I'm just hoping that we can find more examples which can be useful inspirations, because everybody can say it would be nice if there was more equity. And Denmark is a great example, I agree. But many people may feel, well, Denmark's sort of already a developed country. What can countries that aren't so fortunate as Denmark do? So I'm hoping, and it might not be so successful an example, but we should be able to point to some examples. What I remember is the way that some countries, which I remember from the 1980s, were in quite a poor situation. The first time I visited South Korea in 1982, I was shocked at how backward many parts of it is. And they have managed to apply technology generally for lots of benefit for many people in society. So I'm just hoping we can find at least some other examples and highlight, because examples can have a kind of a fire starter nature. They can spark inspiration. So that's what lies behind my question.
Thank you. Rose, do you want to comment on that?
You're absolutely right, David. In fact, one of the things I should have done a better job about presenting more examples in the South, where I really work, in the global South, on what we are doing that is transformational, that lies behind my optimism, where I believe it's possible, because there are indeed many countries where we've used these technologies that have created really great transformational change. That's the language we now use in the UN. So you're right about that. So I think that is really important. As I said, 280 technologies that have been availed free, by the way, by innovative companies in the West, or developing countries as we call them, is also an indication of the global good that can come from cooperation between the private sector or industry and government. I think that is something I want to highlight, because it is something we do within the work that I do, partnering with these great companies and them availing this technology. It's really at almost zero cost if we think of the level of investment required to bring an innovation to market. So that is really, I think, another part to the good story that David, you're saying, you know, what are those examples that work? So we really do have a lot of those. It's the point at which I would encourage you to please do look at our website. You will see some of the wonderful things, at least on our last count. 90 million people who've transformed, whether it's health, access to water, or energy. And that's why I said it's not just about the technology, it's the people changing the human condition, bringing our shared values together to the global community. Yeah.
Rose, thank you. I can't believe that's time so quickly. I feel like we're just getting warmed up. But Jaisal, do you have some summarizing points from Rose?
I think I'm really having a heartfelt thanks to Rose for sharing that insight, and how important it is to use technology, not for just the transformation, but for transforming the quality of human condition, because it is the same worldwide when it comes to pain or technology. And I think what is important is bridging the gap between the developing and the developed countries, and transitioning them and giving access to technology and using technology for the right use is what we intend to do for with shared values. Equality of society is what we should aim for, all of us, whether it is technology or other parts where our values are going to count. Thank you, Rose, and leave you to the chat for the questions. Over to you, Richard.
Oh, we'll just say thank you, Rose, and Valerie for being on the couch as well. That's superb. Jaisal, thanks for that summary. You could always go to Google and type in Boundless Podcast and then put Rose's name, and there's Rose and I having a chat all about AI and environmental sustainability. Rose, thank you so very much.